Alireza and Hikaru have the most amazing battles both online and over the board, and I'm rewinding here to 2019. This is the first game they played that's recorded in chessgames.com. It's the Blitz battle. It was the Blitz World Championship. Now I'm excited to see what will happen between these two in the upcoming candidates, so let's have a look at this one, rewinding to their first over the board game here. We had Alireza with the black pieces and Hikaru kicks off with pawn to e4. So c5 from Alireza, knight to f3, d6, knight to c3 now, so not going for the usual d4 move, bit of an offbeat system. The players do this a lot in Blitz games. Now we had knight to f6, h3 from Hikaru, more offbeat stuff, getting away from all the mainline theory. Knight c6 now from Alireza, pawn d4 here, and we had a captures here, the knight recaptured, and Alireza goes for e5, that classic kind of Najdorf move. You stake a claim in the centre, kick the knight back. You do leave a hole on d5 here, yes, but in compensation, black gets some quick development and you instantly have imbalanced the position. So the bishop now came to e7, Hikaru goes bishop c4, menacingly eyeing this king plus the d5 square. Both players now castled the king, and bishop e6 from Alireza challenges that diagonal, and you wouldn't want to take here as white, because after pawn recaptures, although you've ruined the pawn structure there, you're actually helping black achieve d5, and when you've got these structures, if black can ever break with d5, they'll usually get a good game, equalising the centre and more. So we didn't have captures there. The bishop dropped back to b3. Pawn h6 now from Alireza, covers that g5 square from the bishop g5 stuff. And now here I'd have preferred to see Hikaru go queen to e2, then sit this rook on d1, let's say, or maybe the other rook. We'll see what he plays here. Rook to e1. Looks very normal holding this pawn, but he kind of just gives black a bit of a free hand now, too many tempos. So Alireza goes knight a5, very logical, targeting this bishop. Again, that would then support d5. This bishop came to e3. Now pawn a6, prepares b5, classic Sicilian break. And queen to e2 now from Hikaru, clearing the d-file, preparing to bring the other one across. And this is what I mean about Hikaru's setup here. You know, bit of a traffic jam on the e-file. These pieces don't look beautiful. And after queen to c7, anticipating the rook coming to the d-file, we did see that rook come along. But now Alireza can chop on b3. Hikaru actually takes back with the c pawn here. Normally you're taught to capture towards the centre, so a takes looks more logical. But in this position, Hikaru's doing that one so that he's not got pressure on the c2 pawn in later variations. And now Alireza goes b5. He's threatening b4. Hikaru decides he doesn't want to live with that one, so he goes b4 himself. But now queen b7 from Alireza. First he targets that e4 pawn, and the knight drops back, pretty miserable, defending the pawn. And here we go. He's now ready to break with d5. He's more than equalised. Alireza's better here. But he doesn't play it immediately. This is quite an interesting one. I would suspect he didn't do this because he didn't like bishop c5. You give that outpost square, the game can start getting a bit complex. So instead he prepares it. He goes rook a to c8, and this is the luxury of Alireza's positions. He's quite a few tempos ahead. So after rook c8, we had a3 now from Hikaru. He covers that b4 pawn, anticipating d5 here, opening up the bishop. And now Alireza goes pawn d5, breaks in the centre. So captures from Hikaru, the knight recaptures, and now he goes queen to f3. He's pinning that knight, the black queen is undefended, so it jumps into c6 here. Now it's defended by the rook, and so now Hikaru captures on d5, but he does activate this black bishop when he does this. Menacingly now the bishop and queen are lined up against this g2 pawn, and here we see a trade-off of pawns, but it favours black. So Hikaru is attacking this one, but Alireza doesn't defend it. He plays this brilliant move, pawn to f5. So he's threatening f4. White doesn't have time to take here using the pin, because then you're just capturing with the queen. So Hikaru's pretty much forced here to take on e5, but now the bishop kicks it away, it dropped back here, and then Alireza crashes through on g2. Hikaru's king is now looking unsafe. That's a big issue, as well as the fact that he has the bishop pair here. So the queen now captured on c6, bishop recaptures. Hikaru now finds this nice outpost on c5, and this is a very thematic move as well. If your opponent has the bishop pair, you usually want to try and trade one of those ones off so that they're not so deadly working in combination together. But after rook to f6 here from Alireza, an excellent reply, Hikaru can't actually trade that one off, which he wants to do. And the problem is that after takes here, rook recaptures, you've got this one now swinging back to g6 and then down here, and it's too much of an initiative. So if, for example, white went knight to b3 here, you can't come to f3, of course, the bishop's covering. You open up this d file, but then the rook can switch. This is the problem. You check the king, it goes away. You check like this, king e2. You start checking here, and you're giving the king the runaround, basically. This is very good for black. So that's why if we run it back here, Hikaru didn't capture the bishop on d6. Instead here, he played king f1. He anticipated that checking attack. But now Alireza can save the bishop. So he hops into f4 here. The bishop came back, again looking to trade. Alireza's having none of it. He comes down to h2. And now the rook came to c1, pressures that bishop, comes onto an open line. Rook g6, again looks to invade, play bishop g2 check. So king e2 anticipates that. Hikaru's looking to run his king away. And now the best move here for Alireza was actually rook to e8. Now the guys are playing on very low time here, of course. But rook to e8 was best because now you're threatening f4. And if you run the king again, king d1, you can switch this rook back. There's still lots of pressure down the e file. f4 is coming. Not good for white. You can start trying to cling on with moves like f3, but very challenging position. Instead, Alireza played rook to d8 here. Still a good move. Pressures down that d file where the king might end up. But now Hikaru just gets time to go knight to f3, trying to stabilize. And he picks up a vital tempo on that dark squared bishop. So it drops all the way back. And here Hikaru makes a big blunder. So he wants to challenge one of those powerful rooks, come onto an open file, but he should do it down the d file. For the reason being, he challenges down the g file here, but now Alireza chops that one off, and Hikaru blunders with the recapture, but neither one is particularly palatable, to be honest. So you should go back with the knight, because then that one's not a tactical liability. But when you go with the rook here, which is what Hikaru played, now can you find the move which just rips apart the white position? And if you're enjoying this video, do hit that like button, let me know, and consider subscribing to the channel to never miss a future video. So the move that black can play here is pawn to f4, and it just destabilizes everything. Now the bishop's attacked. What happens if you save it, say with bishop to c5? Well, now very simple check, and the king has nowhere to go that still holds on to the knight. So once it moves, knight drops off. And just coming back here, if instead of moving the bishop, you try knight to d4, counter-attacking this one, well then you can simply move it away to d5. Say you now move your bishop back to c1, well now you've left the defense of the knight. So you could have a check here, king goes, knight drops. So all of the tactics just aren't working for white. You're losing a minor piece. But unfortunately, Alireza missed this move. When this rook came across the g1 here, he was only looking at the x-ray to the king, the fact that the bishop could take this pawn soon, and so he plays king f7, misses f4, but now Hikaru again just gets some time to stabilize his pieces. So he goes knight to d4, hits the bishop, that one's attacked as well as the pawn, so Alireza drops back, covers his pawn. Now f4 from Hikaru though, he stops the f4 stuff altogether, and Hikaru's starting to stabilize now. This one could go either way, they're playing on seconds. So rook to e8 played, comes to the open file, king f2 steps off, rook e4 invades, pressures the f4 pawn. knight e2 drops back, covers that pawn, Alireza goes bishop to e6, and it sets a trap. Because say Hikaru had casually gone knight to g3, you hit rook, you hit pawn, it looks so natural. Well, now you smash through on e3, king takes, bishop a7, you pick up the rook here. So you have to be so careful in these positions, and we know Alireza would have found that one if Hikaru had gone knight to g3. So he didn't play that one, he went rook d1 instead. Some pressure down here if the bishop ever moves. Now this pawn came to g5, another excellent move from Alireza, trying to destabilise the king side. He wants f4 if Hikaru captures, so he didn't do that. He played king to f3, and the best way for Alireza to continue here is keep that pressure there. Go king g6 for example, but he captures on f4, slightly hasty because now the knight jumps in and Alireza now actually gives the advantage back to Hikaru for the first time in the game. So he should go bishop to e5 here, retain his bishop pair, and if white wants to chop one, then you can do this of course, but you'd rather keep the dark squared bishop than the light. At least now you've got a lot of pressure against these pawns, which could be eaten later in the game. What Alireza does though is chop off the knight. Now this one recaptures and it's anyone's game here. White's even slightly for choice when you're running this with an engine. Pawn h5 now from Alireza. We had rook d6 here from Hikaru, invading, hits the backwards a6 pawn, and you can't defend that one of course, so Alireza goes active, rook c4, he wants to pick up on b2. And now Hikaru just takes a time out. He goes pawn h4 here. He obviously didn't want Alireza doing that move, starting to box in the white king a bit more. Then there was rook c2. Now he defended the b2 pawn, and after rook c4 back, hitting h4, only now did he take on a6. He gives that h pawn, which Alireza snapped off, and so we could have a race on our hands here. Rook a7 check was now played, king e8, and now bishop f6 looks absolutely fatal. You hit the rook and you threaten rook e7 check, picking up the bishop. But bishop d5 check, Alireza's saving grace. It kicks the king away and then the game goes on. Now Hikaru steps to the e-file here. I think he should have gone king to f2 as a better move. Say you had check, then the king can move away again and you can keep checking, but you don't actually make progress. But what Hikaru does here is very ambitious. So he goes over to the e-file here. We had a check from e4 and he keeps marching the king. He actually comes all the way over. After this bishop c4 check, he hits c3, but now pawn f4. How is that pawn actually being stopped when you've stepped your king all the way across? And the only way to do it is with bishop h4 or bishop d4, then you cover this square. But Hikaru goes wrong. In the time pressure, he pushes b3, expecting that one to move, but it doesn't. Alireza just goes pawn f3. That pawn's just going through, you're not obliged to move the bishop. Hikaru goes bishop to g7, clearing the f-file, trying to bring the rook across, but simply f2 here. Hikaru checked, and king d7 from Alireza is completely over, because if you go rook to f8, the pawn queens anyway, supported by the bishop, game over. If you keep checking the king from here, well, it just moves all the way over, the checks run out, game's completely gone. So Alireza takes this one. Hikaru was shaking his head at the end of the game. The video is on YouTube. I'll try and dig it out, stick it in the description of this video. Really good fun to watch. I hope you enjoyed this one. If you want to see another amazing Alireza bullet game, click here. Thanks for watching. See you soon.